promise of functional cure, how would that affect the treatment rates and the diagnosis rates potentially? Would more people be diagnosed, and how many more patients would actually go into treatment?
I can't getting specific estimates I think is very challenging, but as I allude to, I think that if the functional cure is as high as it is, instead of treating only 40%, that may increase potentially significantly, where we might increase that to 60% of patients, where we would be treating not just those with active inflammation, but those with cirrhosis, potentially stage 3, or beyond, depending on how effective those agents are in specific populations. So you use the benchmark of 40% functional cure rate, but it's not going to be 40% for everyone. And so if there are differences between those with early disease, mild disease, those with high DNA, low DNA, those in Asian, non-Asian patients, those with genotype A versus B versus C versus D or other genotypes, baseline viral loads, all those variables, host and viral together, may influence what proportion of patients will actually go on treatment. But the idea is that if it is 40% across all those populations, it can potentially increase the treatment rate overall substantially. In terms of effect on diagnosis upstream, I really don't know. I think that in the short term, I don't think it's going to have a huge impact. But I have to say is that in the Hep C experience is that because of all the marketing campaigns for the new oral DAAs, that actually has had an impact on screening. So because everyone's seeing some type of bus ad or radio commercial about some new therapy, and saying that if you're a baby boomer, you should get tested, et cetera, et cetera. And so I do think that the availability of new curative therapies and all the marketing that comes with that could have an impact. But I'm somewhat a skeptic. I actually don't think that in a U.S. market it's going to have as much impact. But I think in other countries which are high prevalence, especially in some of the Asian African countries, that could have a larger impact.
Okay. And one other question on your thoughts on TDF versus TAF for a tenofovir or a nuke regimen, and your thoughts on different potential efficacy and or safety of those two different choices?
Yeah, so at this point, it's a kind of a no-brainer to use the TAF version for those who are treatment naive. The question mark is that for those who are already on TDF, is there a need to switch over to TAF? And the short answer is there is no medical need for it because, frankly, a lot of patients are doing very well on Variad or TDF and are at very low risk for either bone or kidney abnormalities, especially younger people. But so it's a case-by-case decision. But that being said is that we offer to all of our patients who are on TDF the option to transition to the new prodrug formulation. Now, the exception to that rule is that for young women of childbearing age, we have very good data from the Metropolitan HIV data showing that tenofovir TDF formulation is very safe in pregnant women. But with TAF, I presume that the safety in pregnancy is the same, but we just don't have data for it. And so that's why for women of young women of childbearing age, we are not switching from TAF to TDF. TDF to TAF. And those who are starting, we exclusively use TDF for that reason. But outside that exception, there's no reason to use TDF anymore preferentially. We preferentially use TAF.
What about from a payer perspective, where one may be generic versus the other?
Oh, yeah, that's very relevant, actually. As you're aware, we now do have generic formulations. And so there is variation from payer to payer along these lines. So we have had pushback on getting the Vemlidy version. And the reality is that for some more stringent payers, which are many, that for those who don't have a medical need because they are not high risk or don't already have some evidence of renal insufficiency or risk factors like diabetes, hypertension, that we are pushed to using generic TDF rather than the branded TAF. But for everybody else, assuming that there's equivalence of out-of-pocket expense and no barrier in terms of payer coverage, we haven't had issue. Now, in my own experience has been that the same payers that cover branded Variad, that there's equal access to branded Vemlidy. So if they're covering one, they're covering both. But for those where there's already a difference in terms of pushing people to using generic entecavir tenofovir, those are the same ones